It was the end of a long shift at the popular petrol station in North Geelong. The sun had long since set, and Martin Kepler was walking back to his car. His shoulders sagged as the exhaustion finally hit him. He reached his car, put the keys in the driver's side door to unlock it, when he heard a voice calling out his name. He sighed and looked up. The nighttime supervisor was jogging across the concrete. The rows of petrol pumps were finally empty behind him. "What's up?" Ben Rascombe slowed to a halt and smiled for a moment as he caught his breath. "Sorry to ask you, mate, but we need you to come in for a shift tomorrow." Martin shook his head. "Can't, man, not tomorrow. I've worked 7 days in a row. I need to keep my next few days off free." "Come on, man, help me out here," Ben said, his voice pleading. "No, I have 3 days off now and I'm going to relax at home and go nowhere." "Mate, it's not very team friendly now, is it?" "Fucking what?" Martin snapped. His eyes now burned with indignation. Ben went to speak, but Martin's glare silenced him. "I'm going home, Ben. I wouldn't stand there if I were you." Ben stood for a moment longer before he turned and headed back inside the petrol station. Martin got inside his car and slammed the door shut. His blood boiled at the sudden rush of anger that swelled within him. He grasped the steering wheel and felt his hands tighten around the worn leather. It creaked and twisted beneath his whitening knuckles when at last he let go, leaned back and took a deep breath. "Calm down," he said to himself. "He's just an arsehole and you are now headed to your girlfriend's place." He opened his eyes and let out a deep sigh. His anger vanished and the tired weight of exhaustion returned. He turned the key in the ignition. The engine grumbled to life and Martin put the car into reverse. He swept backwards before putting it into drive and drove forwards, following the lane-marked concrete around the whole petrol station complex and turned onto Thompson Road. "10 minutes later, Martin had reached the northern end of Thompson Road and at the lights turned left onto Cox Road. He travelled a minute down the road upon which Geelong's oldest suburbs of Norlane and Corio straddled, until he reached the great roundabout where Cox Road met Matthews Road and Anarchy Road, which itself did not end like the others, but curved up the overpass that had been built over 10 years previous and into the hills that overlooked Geelong. The night was dark with heavy cloud cover and a bitter cold bite to the air, and just enough of a breeze that it clawed through one's body. Because of this, Martin had his windows up and the heater thrown out hot air into the car's interior. Just as he was enjoying the heat, the windows began to mist up, and Martin cursed as he was forced to turn off the heat and open the windows just enough to allow the flow of air through. The mist retreated, but he felt the night's cold chill bite. He scowled and continued his drive down the narrow, lonely road. Darkness pressed in all around him. He was far from the reassuring lights of Geelong's suburbs. Up here, in the hills, above the city, there was nothing but vast empty paddocks or old brick homes set far back from the road on large estates, heavily shrouded with tall, broad trees. No light ever came from these houses, and Martin wondered, not for the first time, if anyone even lived up here. This was Lovely Banks, and for all he knew, it could have been a ghost suburb. The inhabitants either fled or dead and rotting in these homes that Geelong had obviously forgotten. He shivered and something to his rearview mirror caught his eye. It was a pair of headlights. They were distant, far behind him, yet he could instantly tell that they were set to high beam. Not worried, Martin knew those beams would dip to normal any minute now. But they didn't. He frowned and looked up in his rearview mirror. Not only were they still set to high, but they were getting closer, very, very fast. He began to feel his heart beat quicker in his chest. The fuck? Martin muttered and glanced down at his speedometer. It read 60 kilometers, the legal limit in this road. The headlights were now right outside his rear window, the high beams filling the entire cabin of his car with light. Martin's head snapped around, his mind unable to handle the daylight conditions in the middle of the black night. He felt his hands shake as his mind screamed for action he did not know how to settle upon. He glanced over his shoulder, but the light was too bright for him to see the driver tailgating him. Martin snarled and slammed his hand down on the car horn, blaring it loudly 3 times. The car behind him blared its own horn and lurched forward, bumper bar striking bumper bar. Martin's eyes went wide as he cursed again. His hand smashed the indicator and he pulled across to the wrong side of the road. The other car just watched him and made no effort at all to overtake. Oh shit, Martin muttered. This guy's out for terror. His blood went cold. He was truly terrified and at a loss as to what could now be done. I don't dare pull over. God only knows what he would do. His mind scrambled for seconds. He pulled back across to the proper side of the road, and the tailgating car followed. Martin looked into the rearview mirror and then tapped his brakes. It was a slight touch, but enough for his brake lights to blink on. Suddenly, the tailgater's own wheels screamed as they slammed their brakes on. Martin let out a burst of triumph. Dickhead! You want terror, but God forbid you have an accident. Martin wasted no time. He slammed his foot down on the accelerator and took off along the straight road. The tailgater fell far behind him. The speedometer leapt from 60 to 100 and then higher still. Martin wasted no time. He knew there was a turn-off coming up and he prayed he could pull this next maneuver off without killing himself. His phone was aglow with Google Maps and he saw that he was coming to a turn-off. He switched off all his lights, cut everything, then jammed the wheel hard over. His own wheels now screamed as he took the turn way too fast. The rear swung out and he wound up spinning the car around the corner onto Tower Hill Drive. Martin then turned the wheel in the opposite way to his spinning, and at once the car came out of the spin, straightening out. Now he slammed the brakes and brought the speed down to just under 60. He took another turn onto Emerson's Road and felt the roadway give way to unpaved gravel. He slammed the brakes and brought the car to a halt. Thick clouds of dust and smoke billowed around him. He spun around in his chair and saw the tailgater scream past on Anarchy Road. Martin sighed and slumped back in his chair. Every muscle in his body was tense and he shook terribly, the terror still gripping every fibre of his being, but for now at least he seemed to be all right. Thank you, God, Jesus, whoever you are. Thank you for not letting me die. Martin was not particularly religious. He had never been to church, but in that moment he believed in God, a God, any God who had not let him spin into a tree or be run down by that tailgating psychopath. Martin sat there for what felt like a long time, just listening to his beating heart slowly return to normal. It was, in fact, no more than just a few minutes. With an effort, he got out of the car to inspect the damage. The wheels were all worn, and there was a terrible stink of burnt rubber and something else about the car. He cursed softly at the expense he could see building up for the repairs that he would have to fork out for after this awful experience. He shuffled back to the car, put his seatbelt on, and turned the key in the ignition. Nothing. What? His mind screamed, and he tried again. Nothing. The engine would not turn over. There was not even a flicker across the dashboard. The car was dead, a paperweight on the dusty gravel road in the middle of nowhere. He sighed and closed his eyes. In that moment, another sound, buzzing, drew his attention. He looked down in time to see his phone die. No! He snatched it up and desperately tapped the screen and pressed the buttons. Nothing. First the car died, and now his phone cut him off from any possible assistance. Flash of anger surged through him, and he threw his phone away. It banged loudly off the dashboard and bounced off the passenger's side chair and thudded into the floor of the car. Martin closed his eyes and slumped down in his chair. He absently put on the handbrake and quietly contemplated his options. It did not take long for the heat to dissipate and the cold of the night to creep in and claw at Martin's flesh and bones. He shivered terribly as the cold dug deep, and the terror of the tailgater and the insane driving speeds quickly retreated from his mind momentarily as the reality of the cold night began to bite. His mind began churning through every swear word he knew. He verbalized nothing, however. It was too cold to even do that. For over half an hour, Martin sat shivering and freezing in his car, his breath fogging white as he breathed. He began to nod off when there suddenly appeared two headlights, bright and full, on the horizon. Martin opened his eyes and then sat very upright. His heart began beating fast, but then the headlights dipped to normal as the light illuminated the stone-cold car. Martin sat up as the car cruised down the dirt road at a steady pace. As it drew near, however, the car slowed down until it came to a stop right next to Martin's car. Martin turned his head to the window and saw the other car was slowly winding down their window. But it was a kindly face of an old man that looked out. He smiled and said, "Need a lift, young man?" Martin's mouth fell open and he slowly nodded. "Come on, let's get going." Martin was momentarily shocked, but then grabbed his phone, wallet, and keys and got out. He locked his car and then got into the stranger's car. "I'm Frank," the stranger introduced himself and extended a hand. "Martin, pleased to meet you." He shook the offered hand and clicked his seatbelt into place. "So, where am I taking you?" "Oh, Anarchy, if you could. I was on my way to my girlfriend's house when I ran into a bit of trouble." "Yeah, you have to be careful around here, these parts. Some crazy people on the roads." "Yeah," Martin said, then frowned. He didn't mention anything about another driver. He looked over at Frank, who was driving with a pleasant smile on his face. Martin looked down at his hand. That handshake with Frank had left a strange, lingering sensation in his palm. There had been something odd about that. Not the handshake, but Frank's hand. As if it was overly dry and leathery, but not in the overworked kind of way. It was different. The importance began to fade quickly from his mind, however, as the sense of weariness overcame him again, and this time he neither could nor would fight it. As he dozed off beside his elderly Samaritan, he vaguely heard a question asked of him. He felt himself responding, but could not comprehend what was being discussed. He woke with a start and found himself standing by the side of a road. He looked around and saw that he was in Anarchy, in front of his girlfriend's house, and Frank's car was pulling away and taking off. He blinked and looked down as something was in his hand. It was a card with Frank's address written on it. Martin nodded, remembering now that he insisted on paying Frank back for this lift. Looking up again, he noticed Frank's car was gone and the street was silent. He turned and headed into his girlfriend's house. 2 days later, Martin parked his repaired car in the curb of the street in the northwestern Geelong suburb of Hamlin Heights and got out. He looked around as he slowly walked up the footpath and looked at the large 2-story red brick house with a perfectly maintained hedge along the inside of a short brick fence. He walked to the driveway and saw a small patch of trimmed and neat lawn and a flowering garden bed beside a short flight of stairs that led up to a pillared porch. Martin walked up the neat, weedless driveway and jogged up the stairs to the porch and the front door. He pressed the button and a soft ring rang out inside the expansive house. There was a sound of footsteps approaching, and an old woman, well dressed with long hair tied up in a bun, opened the door. She stood and smiled at Martin. "May I help you?" she asked. "Yes. I was wondering if Frank was home. I owe him for picking me up in the middle of the night a couple of nights back." The old woman frowned and she slowly shook her head. "I'm afraid you're mistaken, young man," she replied. "It wasn't Frank who picked you up." Martin was taken aback and frowned. I'm not mistaken, ma'am. His name was Frank and he gave me this address." "That's not possible," she replied, with a knowing but gentle smile. "You've obviously misheard. This is the address he gave me. He wrote it down." Martin handed over the card, and when the old woman saw the card with its own handwriting, the colour drained from her face, and her hand shook. "Where did you get this?" the old woman asked, her voice low and cold, almost hollow. "From Frank." The old woman looked up at him sharply, and then turned and walked off into the house. After a moment, she returned and showed Martin a framed picture. "Is this the man who picked you up?" Martin looked at it, and right there in the picture was Frank, standing next to the old woman before him. Except in the photo, she was at least 20 years younger. "That's him, yes," Martin exclaimed. "Where can I find him?" He looked at the old woman, who now looked back at him with sad eyes. "Barrable Hill Cemetery in Highton, dear." Martin's mouth went dry and his blood went cold. "He's been dead for 25 years now." Martin could not help but gape at her, his mind reeling. The old woman gently took the framed photo back and said, "Perhaps you should come in, dear, before you faint." She guided Martin inside and closed the door. If you enjoyed this content, then please like, subscribe and share. It would help us immensely. Would you like to see these videos early, before everyone else, or enjoy exclusive content? Then join Legio Centurion Films on Patreon. The greater the support, the more often we can create video content for you. Check out our other YouTube channel for all our other content released by Legio Centurion Films. There you will enjoy everything from our latest short films to examples of showreel scenes. You can also enjoy this content on our website, www.l-cfilms.com.au.